All right, so be sure to check out my next video that I'm probably going to work on after this, where it exposes the janky hypocrite that funds organizations like Heritage Foundation does, climate accelerationism, and how he's bigot. So one of the fastest ways to create more red pillars online is to constantly dismiss vulnerable men while pretending you're helping them. And honestly, this video is a really good example of that. Now, to be clear, I do not think that Danky is wrong about everything here. Some of his points are completely fair. Misogyny exists, trafficking and consensual sex work are not the same thing, and women absolutely deserve autonomy. That's not the issue. The issue is the framing, because throughout this discussion, there's a very obvious pattern. When women struggle, the explanation becomes systemic, nuanced, contextualized. But when men struggle, suddenly the explanation becomes personality, insecurity, insultum, or personal failure. And after a while, people notice that asymmetry. This video is not anti-woman, anti-sex work, or pro-red pill. It's about how shallow a lot of mainstream commentary becomes when dismissing male loneliness, dating struggles, neurodivergence, isolation, and parasocial exploitation. Because instead of actually analyzing those problems, the conversation often collapses into just improve yourself. And ironically, that dismissive attitude is a part of what pushes vulnerable people deeper into radical spaces online. The weird part is that the contradiction starts almost immediately, because the first argument Danky makes is basically OnlyFans creators are just a small minority. But that completely misses how internet culture actually works.
Bullshit, by the way. This is not a thing that most girls, or even like a minority, it's such a small minority of girls that actually like turn to OnlyFans or turn to sex work, like any form of sex work. Even people who are seriously struggling.
So it's a very small minority of women doing this. It's just hyper visible because creators have to constantly promote themselves. Here's the supporting data right here that you can pause and read. Links will be in the description. This is technically true. OnlyFans creators are still a minority, but that's not really the point because online culture isn't shaped by statistical averages. It's shaped by visibility, algorithms, attention, outrage, and engagement. You don't constantly open social media and see plumbers, teachers, accountants, or nurses getting algorithmically boosted every 3 posts. But you do constantly see influencers, hypersexualized content, and parasocial bait and monetized attention economies. So the concern isn't every woman is doing OnlyFans. The concern is hypersexualized content dominates online attention disproportionately. Those two are completely different arguments. A minority can still dominate cultural visibility. Reality TV stars are a minority. TikTok celebrities are a minority. Influencers are a minority, but they still shape beauty standards, dating expectations, social norms, and online culture. That's how algorithmic platforms work. They amplify whatever maximizes engagement. And sexuality happens to be one of the strongest engagement drivers on the internet, especially towards men. The average creator only making around 131 a month is actually important too, because it shows that most creators are not secretly becoming millionaires, but the platform itself is still exploding in scale, which raises a more interesting question. Why is demand for parasocial intimacy growing this aggressively in the first place? Because 87% male user base, massive engagement depth, and explosive growth doesn't happen randomly. And this is where the conversation starts getting weird. Because once the discussion moves into it's just another job, the psychological side of parasocial platforms completely disappears on how they're predatory.
Never been on OnlyFans, then what the fuck are you doing talking about it like you know everything about it? You probably should have done some education, you idiot. No one's asking you to have a wank. No one's asking you to go on OnlyFans and fucking start wanking yourself off to some random model. But you actually have to use the platform a little bit to educate yourself, you fucking dumbass.
And they charge money. We have
Like, oh, you wouldn't be doing it if you weren't being paid for it. Yeah, but that describes every single job.
It doesn't. Okay, except this comparison skips over something massive. Working at McDonald's is obviously not psychologically equivalent to monetizing intimacy, fantasy, loneliness, emotional attention, and parasocial attachment. That's not just another job. And I think this is where the conversation starts flattening everything into the same category. Because OnlyFans isn't simply selling labor, a huge part of the platform revolves around emotional accessibility, simulated intimacy, validation, fantasy connection, and parasocial attention. That's the actual product people are paying for. A cashier sells products, a bartender sells drinks, a therapist sells guidance. But parasocial creators often sell attention, emotional validation, simulated closeness, and fantasy intimacy. Those are psychologically different kinds of exchanges, which means he's empirically wrong, which is why it's just another job doesn't really address the criticism people are actually making. And honestly, I think this is one of the biggest blind spots in the whole conversation. The discussion spends a lot of time analyzing creators' autonomy, stigma, and exploitation towards women, but almost no time, actually, no time, analyzing loneliness, emotional dependency, compulsive attachment, or vulnerable consumers, especially when 87% of the platform is male. Engagement depth is unusually high, and the business model revolves around repeat emotional engagement. At some point, you kind of have to ask, why are so many people becoming emotionally dependent on simulated intimacy in the first place? Because that's probably the more important conversation. And this isn't just anecdotal either. Pew Research has found that 63% of men under 30 were single compared to 34% of women. At the same time, men account for roughly 80% of suicide deaths in the United States. So when platforms built around simulated intimacy start exploding in popularity, it's probably worth asking what broader social conditions are driving that demand. Now, obviously, this does not mean creators are inherently malicious or every user is helpless, but a lot of users absolutely are vulnerable, especially lonely men, socially isolated men, neurodivergent men, emotionally dependent users, or people substituting parasocial intimacy for real connection. Ignoring that vulnerability entirely creates a really incomplete, shallow, one sided analysis of the problem. It's biased and sexist. And this becomes way more noticeable later when struggling men basically get reduced to just needing personality.
Part of the reason why women can afford to be so picky with partners is because they make their own money now. They have their own careers. So men actually have to provide a lot more than just financial standing to to get with someone, I guess. And a lot of them fucking hate that. It's like, oh shit, I actually have to develop a personality now.
As if that's really the only argument, which is his side. Okay, this is probably the moment where the whole video clicked for me, because this takes a massively complicated issue and reduces it to men just need personality. And I'm sorry, but that's just not how reality works. Attraction obviously matters, appearance matters, confidence matters, social ability matters, economic stability matters, and for a lot of people, disability matters, autism matters, anxiety matters, isolation matters, and social exclusion matters too. So flattening all of that into just develop personality sounds less like an analysis and more like a dismissal. A socially awkward autistic guy can spend years hearing just be confident. Meanwhile, he's struggling with eye contact, masking, timing, social cues, sensory issues, or emotional expression.
Of her giant food, a cock in my ass.
At a certain point, that advice stops sounding helpful and becomes harmful because attraction often filters people before their personality even gets a chance to matter, and pretending otherwise just sounds disconnected from real life. Modern dating apps already show extremely uneven attention patterns. A relatively small percentage of men receive disproportionate visibility, while many average men become increasingly invisible inside algorithmic dating environments. Tinder and dating app data repeatedly shows highly uneven match concentration patterns, where a minority of highly attractive users receive disproportionate attention. That has real psychological effects, especially when social interaction itself is increasingly happening through apps, algorithms, and appearance first systems. Women rated roughly 80% of men as below average attractiveness. Meanwhile, men rated women more evenly. Women generally prefer taller male partners across cultures. Height influences attraction, confidence, income, and dating outcomes. And honestly, you can see the same asymmetry inside these online sexual economies too. Most average men cannot monetize sexuality online the same way women can. That's a privilege. Even on OnlyFans, female creators generally receive more demand, more attention, and more financial opportunity than average men. That's by definition a privilege. And this becomes especially noticeable for disabled men, autistic men, socially isolated men, or economically struggling men. A disabled woman can still potentially receive attention, validation, parasocial support, and financial backing online. A disabled man is far less likely to receive the same outcome. That does not mean women have easy lives or female creators face zero exploitation, but the opportunity structure is obviously not symmetrical either. Autistic individuals frequently struggle with social interpretation, dating navigation, emotional communication, and relationship formation. Disabled people experience significantly higher loneliness, social exclusion, and romantic barriers. None of this means women owe men relationships, attraction should be forced, or misogyny is justified. That's not the point. The point is, reducing loneliness entirely to bad personality is an incredibly shallow way to analyze modern social dynamics, especially when so many people are already struggling with isolation, rejection, neurodivergence, and emotional invisibility. And once people feel like their problems are constantly being flattened or mocked, they usually start looking for communities that at least acknowledge that the problem exists.
It's fair to blame women for that at all. Like the manosphere is purely, well, I guess largely, very, very, very much largely the fault of incels and incel grifters. I don't even know if it's inherently misogynistic to purchase OnlyFans content or watch pornography. I think there are definitely the ways where it can be done ethically. No, she's not encouraging people to start doing OF. She's just saying what works for her, which is important. This is completely different from like her usual content, which I haven't got which I'm.
So the manosphere largely comes from incels and grifters. Again, a person could be an incel because of disability alone, from just disability. Porn consumption doesn't automatically make someone misogynistic, and there are ethical contexts for sex work, but he doesn't go into them. Convenient. And this is where I think the analysis becomes way too reductive. Because yes, there absolutely are grifters, misogynists, rage baiters, manipulative influencers, and cynical manosphere creators online, obviously. But reducing the entire phenomenon to incels and grifters completely ignores why those spaces exploded in the first place. Movements don't appear out of nowhere. They usually grow around loneliness, alienation, rejection, frustration, confusion, or unresolved social problems. A lot of vulnerable men are not entering these spaces simply because they hate women. A lot of them enter because they feel invisible, isolated, romantically unwanted, socially awkward, emotionally disposable, or completely disconnected from normal social life, as they're doing. And when they try talking about those experiences, they often hear just improve yourself, or you just need personality, or you're just insecure. And after hearing that enough times, people stop feeling understood and start feeling dismissed because that's exactly what it is. It's sexist. And to be clear, this does not mean the red pill is entirely correct, misogyny is justified, or manosphere influencers are helping people long term. Because honestly, a lot of red pill content eventually becomes cynical, manipulative, fatalistic, exploitive, and psychologically unhealthy. A lot of it turns vulnerable men into permanently angry people. That's real too. But rejecting toxic conclusions should not require pretending the underlying frustrations are fake. Those are separate conversations. What's frustrating is that Danky actually comes close to a more nuanced point here, because he says porn consumption itself does not automatically make someone misogynistic. And honestly, I agree with him there. But then the conversation immediately jumps back into morality, incels, grifters, and bad personalities, instead of asking, why are so many people becoming emotionally dependent on parasocial intimacy in the first place? That's the deeper issue. Most people do not radicalize because someone instantly convinced them women are evil. Usually it happens after loneliness, rejection, invisibility, humiliation, isolation, or feeling psychologically ignored for years. The ideology usually comes later. And if mainstream conversations constantly flatten struggling men into incels, losers, or defective personalities, then someone else eventually fills that vacuum. usually with much worse answers. And by the end of the video, a pretty obvious pattern starts emerging. Women's struggles get contextualized, male struggles get individualized. Why commentary like this creates more red pillars? And honestly, this is the part I think a lot of commentary channels completely fail to understand because they're not trying. You can accidentally create more radicalized men by constantly dismissing vulnerable men while pretending you're helping them. And I genuinely think this video falls into that trap repeatedly. Not because Danky is wrong about everything, some of his points are completely fair. Misogyny exists, exploitation exists, and women absolutely deserve autonomy. That's true. But the imbalance in how the conversation gets framed is impossible not to notice after a while. When women struggle, the explanation becomes systemic, contextual, nuanced, empathetic. When men struggle, the explanation suddenly becomes insecurity, personality, inceldom, misogyny, or personal failure. And after hearing that over and over, people stop feeling analyzed and start feeling psychologically dismissed. And to be clear, none of this means misogyny is justified, women are the enemy, or red pill ideology is healthy. Because honestly, a lot of red pill spaces eventually become bitter, cynical, manipulative, resentful, and psychologically destructive. A lot of them correctly identify loneliness, then give people horrible answers afterwards. That's real too. And these issues are not small either. Men account for the majority of suicides, the majority of homelessness, and younger men are increasingly reporting social isolation and relationship absence. But vulnerable men do not become radicalized because someone instantly convinced them women are evil. Usually it happens after years of isolation, invisibility, rejection, emotional neglect, humiliation, loneliness, or feels like nobody takes their problems seriously because people like this, they don't. So when mainstream commentary constantly responds with just improve yourself, or you just need personality, or the manosphere is just incels and grifters, people eventually stop feeling understood. And once people feel psychologically invisible long enough, they start searching for communities that at least acknowledge the pain, even if those communities eventually become toxic. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons these online pipelines keep growing, is because of feminists that don't actually want equality for both. They just want equality for one while pushing down the other. That's not feminism. Feminism is equality for both. So, by that definition, Danky is not a true feminist.